Welcome back to Vote 17. My name is Maggie Dever. This is a student-produced election series where we interview a range of politicians before the election. We want this to be about student issues, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask the politicians, please like the Vote 17 Facebook page and send them through. I'm joined by my co-host today, Cameron Meads.
Thanks, Maggie. Today we're joined by the Honourable Michael Woodhouse, a Nationalist MP based here in Dunedin North. Minister, welcome.
Hi Cam, hi Maggie, thanks for having me.
No worries. Minister, you were born and raised in Dunedin. What do you love about Dunedin and what makes it so special?
Oh gosh, look, it's a fantastic city. As you say, I was born and raised here, but I have lived overseas. I've lived in Wellington a couple of times. We made a conscious decision to come back here for job opportunities, but also because it was a great place to bring up our kids. We're also on the doorstep of the world's just most amazing playground in central Otago, which is where I've spent just about every summer of my life. So yeah, there's just a lot of reasons to live in Dunedin.
Specifically, what made you want to become a Member of Parliament, and what life experiences led you to becoming number 10 on the National Party list?
Well look, I really didn't grow up wanting to be a Member of Parliament. It was certainly something that I had a great interest in, and I suppose a latent sort of possibility that it might happen. It all came about very quickly in early 2008 when my predecessor, Catherine Rich, announced her retirement as the National MP based here in Dunedin. And I had to do quite a bit of thinking about whether or not that was a path I wanted to follow. I had a great job in an iconic organisation here in Dunedin, and I was making a choice to step into the cauldron of politics. So it was a fairly hasty call, to be honest, but never once in that nearly 10 years now since I had to make that call have I regretted it. It's just been a wonderful journey.
In your maiden speech in Parliament, you mentioned that you were brought up by hardworking parents in a large family home. What lessons have you taken from them, and how has it influenced your political and social philosophy?
Yeah, very large family, one of 9. The first 8 of them under 8 years of age. And so it was a pretty amazing upbringing, brilliant parents. And we never wanted for the basics, certainly not food or warmth or love. But the stuff that were, in those days at least, considered luxuries, I had to work for. So I had a part-time job from the age of about 10, paper route, milk run, and those were in the days, some of our younger listeners won't know this, but milk was delivered to the home, and working in a barber shop after school, all designed to get me the things that I knew my parents couldn't afford. So those experiences led me to be resilient. You need to stand up to your brothers and sisters, to have a voice amongst a very large family, but also that hard work had its reward. And I think it's fair to say, you know, we didn't really overtly say this, but I would have been more from a Labour family than a National one for sure. But a lot changed since I grew up in the 70s. And I just know that the values that I have are absolutely aligned with those of the National Party.
Cool. So, again with your maiden speech, so you said that you firmly believe the future of this nation's health is in the strong public sector. Mm-hmm. Do you think, considering all the ongoings with Dunedin Hospital, do you think that is a strong and stable public service at the moment?
Well, firstly, let me, from my recollection of the maiden speech, I was making another point, and that was that I believed at that time that there was an ideological mindset against the private health sector, and bear in mind, as the chief executive of a private surgical hospital here in Dunedin, in Mercy Hospital, I felt that there were opportunities to do better with our public health spending that were not being taken because of an ideology that said private was bad. Now, in a city like Dunedin, we need a strong public and private sector. It creates a synergy. It enables us to attract our researchers here at the university, our surgeons, our anaesthetists, our rheumatologists, our oncologists, all want to come here because of the lifestyle, because of their service to the public sector, but also because of the opportunities they may be able to have to augment their incomes with a private salary. So I think that symbiosis is really important. Ironically, since the national government came to office, I think my friends in the private sector thought there would be a lot more work that would have come their way because of that. Indeed, quite the opposite happened. We asked the public sector to do more. We didn't pour as much money in as the previous government had on a year-on-year basis, that's true, but we certainly got a lot more out of it. Now, as to your question of Dunedin Hospital, firstly, Dunedin Hospital isn't just healthcare in the south, and I think overwhelmingly there is a very, very good service being offered. When people need the services that they do, they get them in a timely manner. But it's always possible to find someone whose surgery was cancelled or who didn't get the appointment they thought they needed, and we're seeing a lot more of that right now. The hospital itself, the building, is in significant need of repair or replacement, and we'll be making some announcements about that in the not too distant future. But the government has been really clear. The hospital will be rebuilt or refurbished. The medical school isn't going anywhere, and tertiary services will be maintained. There are some people who'd like to run interference on that message, but it can't be clearer than that.
Yeah, so some of those people who are running interference on that message is none other than your opposition down here, David Clark.
That's right.
And a
the
couple of
spokesperson for Labour now,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, and a couple of councillors as well.
Yes. Yeah, very good Labour people as well.
Yeah, while you've said you agree with the sentiments of the Dunedin SOS campaign, you still say that you oppose it. Can you give us any more reasons why?
No, I don't oppose the sentiment. I just think it's unnecessary because they're pushing on an open door. The government wants what the campaign wants. But there is an understandable impatience within the city to get it done soon. And Dr. Clark had a ridiculous one-person petition, actually, to Parliament saying that the construction of the hospital should commence before the election. Well, I've run hospitals. I've helped in the design and refurbishment of a much smaller one, admittedly. And the one thing I do know is the last thing you want is politicians designing hospitals or setting the timetable for their rebuild. And that's what David was trying to do. I think that's quite an incorrect thing to do. We need to trust the experts in identifying what we're going to need for the next 3 generations or more. And healthcare is going to look very different in the middle of this century. We've got to make sure that we have a design of a building and the infrastructure that is nimble enough to meet those needs as they change. That is going to take some time. I understand the impatience.
But some of those interveners you mentioned before use the example of some hospitals in Australia have been put up in under 4 years.
Yeah.
So how come
the
Dunedin hospital's getting pushed
back? Well, the only one I could find when I researched that was one in South Australia in Adelaide, and it was heavily criticised for the manner in which it was undertaken. We also need to make sure that in getting it right, that we don't rush it like that. I don't think my children and grandchildren are going to thank me for that just for a political expediency. When Dunedin Hospital was the current ward block was opened in 1981, the Minister of Internal Affairs opened it, and he mentioned the fact that it had taken 23 years from concept to completion. The Clinical Services Building, which is one that we definitely know needs to be replaced, that took about 18 years. So if we can do this in 10 or 12, it's about half the time that it took previously. Look, again, I understand the impatience. My kids, myself, we are the users of this health facility as well, and if we could get it done in a more timely manner, damn right we would. And if you think about it, right, we're 6 weeks out from a general election. Don't you think, if this was as simple as Dr. Clark would have it, that we would have made that announcement already? It just doesn't make sense that we wouldn't be doing that if we could. So we'll get it right, but we won't get it early just for the sake of a political expediency.
Okay, so one part of health which is really important to students and indeed the younger population in this country is mental health. Yeah. What is the national government going to do if re-elected about what could potentially become a national health crisis?
Well, it's certainly a concern. And what's interesting about the way mental health is, and mental ill health really was what we're talking about, is the manifestation of this in different ways. I think there are a lot more different pressures on younger people particularly than there were a generation ago. The influence of social media, the rise of internet bullying, drug and alcohol use, driving, depression and anxiety. There does appear to be a rise in psychosis. We've the last budget alone had a $250 million boost in mental health spending. About 150 million of that was for the core business that we do right now. And another 100 million was earmarked for special projects, which I know colleagues have been working really hard on that. That's the Minister of Health, Social Development and Education particularly. And you'll see some more announcements in the not too distant future about how that money's going to be spent. But I also think we need to look at the way in which mental health services are provided, because they do seem to be, despite the changes that we've had in the last 30 years, they do seem to be built more around an institutional model and at the acute end of mental health manifestations. And I think we've got to invest more into areas that aren't acute but could prevent acute things occurring, particularly in the area of self-harm. I think there's a lot we can do in that area, particularly in adolescent mental health.
So is National just going to put more money into it or have an inquiry? So what's the go forward from here?
There's definitely got to be more money, and there always is. Health gets the highest proportion of any increase in budget spending. But we've got to be very careful and precise about where we spend that so we have the most effect. And one of the things that we're seeing in the government's approach to social spending, the whole social investment model, is that there is a symbiosis across votes. We've always been very linear in looking at health and looking at education, looking at social development, justice, corrections, you name it. Well, we're blurring those lines, and we're trying to identify the factors that lead people to high levels of dependency on our health system or on the state more generally. And we're trying to find ways to break that trend. And that involves a bit of bravery, actually. It involves us trying stuff we haven't done before, but also dispensing with stuff if we don't see that it's working. Now, those things work on different from a normal political cycle, but we're determined to start bedding in some of those principles and disciplines into public spending that will have a better outcome in the future.
Alrighty, so moving on to some current election issues. It's certainly been a dramatic couple of weeks with Mataria Ture resigning and Jacinda Ardern taking over the reins as the leader of the Labour Party. Is National at all concerned with Jacinda's rising popularity and the so-called Jacinda effect? Well,
there is an effect. There's no doubt about that. There's a freshness about the Labour Party that I haven't seen in my time. But we as government and as the National Party are not changing our approach to this election campaign. We're certainly not having to change our billboards, which is one logistic challenge we don't have to worry about. Look, I know Jacinda reasonably well. We haven't had a lot to do with each other, but we both share love of single malts, and we're both members of the New Zealand-Scotland Parliamentary Friendship Association. So we meet over a single malt once a year. The polls are moving around a lot. There's a lot of attention on the other side, and we're not moving. And I think that stability is important. What we're going to do is tell our story of what we've done, why we've done it, but not spend too much time dwelling on that, because actually the public don't care. The public will bank that really quickly, say, yes, you had to get us through the GFC, you did, yes, you had to rebuild Canterbury, now what? And I think that's the story we want to tell, because I think we're on the cusp of a step change in this country, economically, socially, culturally, and a momentum building around bedding in some of the impressive gains that we've been able to make that I think deserves a really good hearing. And I hope in the next 6 weeks that two things will happen that Jacinda Ardern says will happen. One is that they will be relentlessly positive. Well, I hope Kelvin Davis gets that memo. Didn't seem to last weekend. But also that we focus on the issues, because I think when you put the respective policies and issues together, the public will see those differences and they'll have a very clear choice to make. I hope it doesn't become a personality contest.
So essentially you're saying that National's campaign is still going to remain to be strong and stable?
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I think ultimately that's what people vote on. They vote on the things that matter to them. Are they going to have a job next week? Are they going to get the healthcare that they need? Are their kids going to get a good education? Are they going to have to Skype their kids in order to talk to them? Or are those people, those children, grandchildren going to be living and working here in New Zealand? You know, 150,000 New Zealanders who would have left in the last 5 years have stayed because of the good things that are happening. 150,000, that's Dunedin and a bit, you know. So that's a really, really big sign of confidence, I think, and I want to make sure that we can continue that.
Okay, so will National consider working with New Zealand First, if need be, to form a government that can lead future policy changes and stuff? And how much would New Zealand First and Winston Peters dictate policy for the next 3 years, if that's the case?
Well, look, we have stated publicly that we would like to continue to work with our confidence and supply partners that we have now. That's ACT, United Future and the Māori Party. But we certainly haven't ruled out working with New Zealand First. Look, Winston has a track record of being bad for government and governments. 1992, 1998, 2005 to 2008, all led to a bit of an unravelling. Now, I think this is a different New Zealand First, and it may even be a different Winston Peters, but our preference is certainly not to have to, and we'll see what happens. That's over to the voters.
So you're saying that it's going to be an issue when you face it on the day?
Yeah, look, even Winston will say that. I think all of the political parties want to be able to tell their story, get their message out about why it's important to vote for them, and then the public will decide, and on the 24th of September we'll all wake up and then see what happens from there. And it will take a little bit of time to sort that through, probably 2 or 3 weeks at the earliest before we know what the government will look like.
Okay, so just bringing the election back to the local campaign.
Sure.
We've already mentioned David Clark. What can you offer students and North Dunedinites that David Clark simply can't at the moment?
Well, look, David's a good guy. I get on well with him. I just simply think I have more connection with the community, more experience in business and social services, a better track record in Parliament. David got lucky when he first became an MP. He got a couple of members' bills drawn out of the ballot. That gave him a reasonably good profile. And then he went very quiet. And so we see him around a bit. I think the health portfolio, as the opposition spokesman, has drawn him away from Dunedin issues over the last 8 or 9 months. But that's the reality of being the local MP. And look, this is a Labour seat. It's been held once by National in its history. And under MMP, it gets very hard to roll a sitting MP. Do you know how many, in 2014, only one sitting MP was defeated, and that was Hone Harawira and Titai Tokoro. So that would be great. I'd love to be the Dunedin North MP. What's more important to me is that we win the party vote in this electorate. We did so last time for the first time. And that's what I'm going for. 2 ticks if possible, but if you're only going to give me one, give me the party vote one.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the party vote went National's way last election. What do you think this means? So if David gets elected to the Labour seat, but the party vote goes National, what do you think it means in terms of David's representation or your representation of the electorate?
Look, there's a complex dynamic in Dunedin North because there's a very strong Green lobby as well, and for the 3 previous elections, for Materia Ture has been the Green Party candidate here. She was going to stand in Titai Tonga, and so that could change the dynamic a bit, but it gets split a bit 3 ways in the party vote. This is certainly a more left-leaning. It's one of the 4th or 5th most left-leaning electorates in the country, mainly because of the university. But I think also the fact that the election was earlier in the last 2 elections, students might have tended to vote more in Dunedin North, or voted at all, whereas after their exams in November they might have been a bit switched off. And we won. I mean, we won the 6 booths in and around the University of Otago. In 2014. I think that's a pretty significant sort of a development, particularly coming from the nadir of 2002. But what it also says, I think, is that there is a legitimate voice for a centre-right party even on the university campus. I came to Parliament in 2008. I remember doing a Radio 1 interview on the following Monday, and there was a funereal sort of atmosphere of bunch of students that had never known and had grown to fear a centre-right government. And I think we're now getting to the point where there is a group of students on campus that can't remember a Labor government. Now, they don't fear that, but I think there's a much better balance in the discourse, and there's certainly a lot more respectful, albeit robust, exchange between our young political parties, young Labor, young Nats and so on. And I hope that continues over the next 6.5 weeks, because that's really important.
Yeah, so those students make up a pretty large portion of the electorate.
Yeah.
Perhaps an apathetic bunch, maybe. How are you and National working to galvanise those voters to vote National?
Well, look, the first thing they need to do is be interested and vote. Of course I want them to vote National, but I just want them to exercise that precious democratic right. You know, I'm old enough to remember 1994 when South Africa voted truly democratically for the first time in its history, and watching its citizens stand in searing sun on dusty roads for 7 or 8 hours just to do that one thing their people fought for. And we do take that right for granted. And in this country, actually, every single vote counts because of MMP. People say to me, oh, well, you know, it's only one vote. Okay, but it's the same value as my vote, as the Prime Minister's vote. It's worth as much in Dunedin North as it is in Parnell or Wellington Central. As for why they should vote for National, I think they will have the best framework for being able to achieve their ambitions and their potential. Because, you know, the decisions that we make now is going to affect them and their children for generations. Yes, they can be undone, but only slowly. And I think we've got a really good momentum going right now, the balance right between the economic and the social and the cultural. And I think there are a number of sort of cause parties that could upset that significantly, depending on their influence in a led government.
Yeah, so Labor has its 3-year free tertiary education policy, and New Zealand First has its own form of that. So what incentives do students have to vote for National then, if that can be taken as a bargaining chip, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, Labor can campaign on that, but they were the party that brought in student loans, of course, and changed the allowance regime. And so look, we're the 80% free party, right? Because about 80% of the costs of tertiary education are currently funded by the taxpayer, at a time when probably 4 times as many young people of all ages for that matter, are in tertiary education. And I think that's about the right balance. Yes, there is a public good element to our individual educations, but there's actually a significant private good, and somebody with a tertiary degree from Otago can expect to earn, I think it's something like $1.6 million more than someone unqualified over the life of the career that they're going to embark on. And the people who are paying for that 80% of your fees are the supermarket checkout operators and the taxi drivers and the construction workers who aren't getting the benefit of that directly. And so we owe it to them, I think, to do well with that, but also not to overburden the taxpayer, and to make sure that the people in whom the greatest benefit is received also make an investment in that education as well. And I think we've got that balance about right.
Yeah. So do you think the current student loan scheme is working well, especially given rising rents?
Yeah.
Around the country, and perhaps unequal rents if you look at Auckland compared to Wellington.
It's a very good reason to come to the University of Otago, isn't it? Not only do you get the best education in the world, the rents are lower. So there's a shameless marketing plug for the university. But look, you know, I mean, it is tough. I grant you, there is debt that needs to be very carefully managed by young people. I do worry that some students don't understand both the value of their education, but also the importance of keeping the debt that they incur down as low as possible. But you know, what looks like a mountain when you graduate, I've got staff who are graduates of this university, fantastic workers who, you know, they get to their late 20s and their early 30s, and then out comes the bottle of wine when they celebrate the repayment of that debt. It is interest free. Well, at least the interest is not paid by them. So I think, again, we've got that balance about right, notwithstanding that it can be a real challenge for the students.
Cool. Okay, so we're coming pretty close to the end of our interview now, and something we do here at Vote 17 is ask our politicians a series of quick-fire questions.
Sure.
So we get to know you on a whole different level. Are you ready?
Go.
Awesome. Okay, so you used to be a professional rugby player. What's your best memory of rugby?
Well, I wasn't a professional rugby player because I'm old enough to have played in the era before professionalism. So I retired in 1995 or 6, and that was about the year it went professional. But my best memories are certainly kicking a rugby ball around the world. I played a season of rugby in Scotland in the national second division there in a city called Dunfermline, and that was just one of the most amazing experiences I could ever have.
What was the worst haircut that you've ever received?
Oh, the one I did myself. Now, my late father was a barber, the old striped pole, and he wouldn't give me the punk haircut that I wanted when I was 15, and I was a Sex Pistols fan. So I did it myself. I grabbed his clippers and gave myself a number 1.
Okay, if Prime Minister Bill English were to make you a pizza, would you eat it?
Yes, I would. And this isn't being sycophantic. I have unashamedly put spaghetti on my pizzas.
Oh.
I know.
What about pineapple?
Yes. Sorry, yes to both of those.
You're in the right party then.
Yes, exactly.
Do you think that Julian Savia should have been dropped from the All Blacks for the Rugby Championship? It's the most important
Line
question.
ball call. But look, if he wasn't performing, that's what happens. It's a bit like politics, really, isn't it? I mean, we're all going to be examined by the public in 6 weeks, and if we're not performing, we'll probably be dropped as well.
Well, Matt Todd, what more does he have to do to make the All Blacks?
Well, he has been an All Black, but the answer to that is simple. He has to be better than the guy who's already there. And
is he?
I don't think so yet. I'm not a Crusaders fan. He's a good player, but I don't think he's quite there yet.
What would be the best place to grab a coffee in Dunedin?
Well, I'm not really a coffee connoisseur, but I like catching up with people in the Octagon. Nova's a good spot. The Strictly Coffee is also really good. So, but I'll bounce around. Here at the university, coffee's not bad either.
Speaking of university, best Scarfy moment?
Oh, apart from graduating, which was a huge day, watching Felix Geiringer go under the wheels of the Crown car at the protest against student fees in 1991, when the Education Minister, Dr. Lockwood Smith, came down and saw a massive protest. Now, it wasn't a great moment because Felix went under the car, but it was a really interesting insight into student activism at a time when I was sort of becoming much more sort of tuned into almost the anthropology of activism, and I watched it more like a museum than I did as an activist.
Alrighty, and finally, what's the best concert that you've ever been to?
Oh gosh, now I'm really going to show my age. In 1988, I went to the 70th birthday concert for Nelson Mandela at Wembley Stadium in London. He was still in prison on Robbins Island at that time, and there was a benefit concert there it was an anti-apartheid rally effectively with music, and it had some of the greatest artists you could ever imagine performing at that concert, and I'll never forget it.
Who are we talking like big names?
Oh, it was opened by Sting. It had the Rolling Stones, Simple Mind, all the 80s bands that I love, U2, you name it, they were all there, just lining up. Phil Collins and Genesis. It was pretty awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Minister. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today, but we will be back next week to look into the political issues that matter to you. In the meantime, send your questions through to Vote 17, and we'll see you in the studio next week, Friday at 1 p.m. See you then.